The war had already been lost. That's what everyone thought. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed by the Volther, a ruthless alien race with technology far beyond anything the humans could imagine. Cities burned, fleets were destroyed, and entire colonies disappeared into the void of space. Yet, as the galaxy plunged into despair, a spark was quietly growing, a spark no one saw coming. It all started with a group of human scientists stationed on a forgotten research station in the far reaches of the galaxy. They were working on a project that no one thought was important anymore. The Volther had made it clear that they would not be stopped. The humans were just a nuisance to them, something to crush before moving on to their next conquest. But this small group of scientists, led by Dr. Samuel Rise, refused to give up. The station was isolated, a world far from the front lines. Their mission was supposed to be simple: study and develop technology that could help the humans fight back. But with the Volther's overwhelming dominance, the project seemed pointless. Still, Samuel couldn't let go of the idea that there had to be something they could do to survive, something the Volther didn't know about humans. The breakthrough came late one night, in the most unexpected of ways. Dr. Reyes was staring at a piece of broken Volther technology. It was a weapon, one of many that had been captured during the last desperate battle. The scientists had been trying to understand it for months, but it always seemed beyond their grasp. That night, something clicked in Samuel's mind. A simple flaw in the design, a tiny oversight that no one had noticed before. He couldn't believe it. The Volther weren't as perfect as everyone thought. With his discovery, Samuel began to dig deeper. He started seeing more weaknesses in the Volther technology, weaknesses that could be exploited. As he worked, he realized something even more important. The Volther relied too heavily on their advanced technology and rigid strategies. They had no flexibility, no room for improvisation. They thought that their strength lay in their machines and their tactics. They were wrong. Samuel shared his findings with the team, and together they began to formulate a plan. They knew they didn't have the numbers or the firepower to fight the Volther directly. But they didn't need that. They needed something else. They needed to be smart. They needed to outthink their enemies. The first step was small, almost invisible. They began planting tiny pieces of sabotage in Voltar supply lines. Nothing big, just little disruptions that no one would notice at first. A system would fail, a communications line would go silent, and supplies would be delayed. These were small problems, easily dismissed by the Volther as technical glitches. But for the humans, each success was a victory. Days turned into weeks, and the sabotage began to add up. Volther fleets started experiencing strange malfunctions. Equipment failure became common, and their supply lines were constantly disrupted. The Volther leaders were frustrated, but they couldn't find the source of the problems. They blamed it on bad luck, perhaps even on their own soldiers' incompetence. They didn't realize that a group of humans, far from their warfront, were quietly tearing apart their empire. In the heart of Volther-controlled space, a small human fleet led by Commander Lee Carter was preparing for a daring mission. The plan was risky. They would slip behind enemy lines and infiltrate a Volther base, using the chaos caused by the sabotage to their advantage. If successful, they would steal valuable intelligence and perhaps shift the war in humanity's favor. Leah, a seasoned veteran, knew the stakes. Her fleet was outmatched, outnumbered, and outgunned. But what she had that the Volther didn't was the element of surprise and the knowledge that their enemies never expected humans to fight this way. As Leah's fleet approached the Volther base, the tension was unbearable. They moved in complete silence, their ships cloaked and invisible to the Volther sensors. The sabotage had worked perfectly, the base's defenses were malfunctioning, and the Volther didn't even know they were coming. The plan was unfolding perfectly, until it wasn't. A single Volther ship, out of nowhere, appeared on the radar. It shouldn't have been there. Leah's heart raced as she realized that the Volther weren't as blind as they seemed. The alarm bells rang, and the Volther were suddenly awake to the danger. The human fleet engaged in a desperate battle. The odds were against them. Leah watched as her ships dodged and weaved, outmaneuvering the Volther's superior firepower with sheer speed and agility. They were barely holding on, But the humans had something the Volther didn't: the will to survive. They fought harder, faster, smarter. Leah's ship took a hit, but she refused to give up. As the Volther closed in, she ordered a full retreat, but not without taking one last, critical strike at the Volther base. The human fleet barely escaped with their lives, but they had succeeded. The Volther base was crippled. The stolen intelligence was invaluable. And most importantly, the humans had learned something crucial. They could win, not with brute force, but with cleverness and determination. Back at the research station, Dr. Rise received the news. The spark he had started had become a flame, and it was spreading. The humans were beginning to fight back. The Volther were starting to realize that their victory was not as certain as they had once thought. It wasn't going to be easy. The war was far from over. But the humans now had hope, something they hadn't had in years. They had a way to survive, a way to outsmart their enemies, and a way to turn the tide of the war. The Volther had underestimated them, and now they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. Humans, it seemed, were not just survivors. They were fighters, capable of turning even the smallest spark into an inferno. And that spark, the one that no one saw coming, had just ignited the galaxy. The war was never meant to be won. That's what everyone believed. The Volther were too powerful, their weapons too advanced. Humanity was outmatched, their fleets destroyed, their colonies falling one by one. The humans had been pushed back to their last stronghold, a small, isolated planet on the edge of the galaxy. They had no chance of survival, no hope left. But as the Volther armies celebrated their victory, something strange began to happen. A shift, barely noticeable at first, was taking place within the human resistance. A small, unknown unit, its members never seen by the Volther, was quietly causing chaos behind enemy lines. They were the ones who moved in the shadows, the ones who struck without warning. They were the Silent Warriors. Captain Sarah Mendez, a veteran of the human fleet, had heard rumors about this mysterious unit. No one knew their names, and no one had ever seen their faces. Some said they were a myth, a ghost story told to boost the morale of the soldiers. But Sarah wasn't sure. She had seen things, strange things, that she couldn't explain. One night, as Sarah prepared for yet another battle, she received a transmission. It was brief, coded, and came from an unknown source. The message was simple: "We're coming." At first, she thought it was a trap. The Volther had been known to use deception to lure human forces into dangerous situations. But something about the message felt different. It wasn't from the usual commanders. This was something else. Sarah knew she had to take a risk. She gathered her most trusted officers and made her way to the location where the message had come from, a seemingly abandoned base deep within Volther-controlled territory. As they arrived, the silence was deafening. The base appeared deserted. No Volther patrols, no alarms, nothing. It was too quiet. Sarah's instincts screamed that something was wrong. But then, as if answering her fears, the ground shook. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the air, followed by the faint hum of energy weapons. Sarah's heart raced. This wasn't just a random attack. Someone was already here and they were fighting back. Her team rushed inside, weapons drawn, but no one was there to greet them. The base was a maze of dark hallways and empty rooms. But the deeper they went, the more they began to feel the presence of something unseen. A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. Then, the silence was broken by a single figure emerging from the shadows. She was dressed in black, her face covered by a mask. She moved quickly, silently, as though she was one with the darkness. "I thought you'd never come," the woman whispered. "It's time." Before Sarah could ask who she was, the woman vanished into the shadows again. Sarah was left standing there, confused but intrigued. Who was this silent warrior, and how had they been so effective against the Volther? As they continued through the base, Sarah's team discovered something disturbing. The Volther had left behind advanced technology, but it wasn't just any technology, it was their most secretive weapon, a device capable of wiping out entire planets. The humans had no idea how the silent warriors had found it, but now they had a choice to make: destroy the weapon, or use it to turn the tide of the war. But there was no time to think about it. The Volthar were closing in. The base had been compromised, and they were coming to reclaim it. Just as the Volthar forces landed outside, the silent warriors made their move. Sarah watched, astonished, as a small group of them appeared from the shadows. They didn't speak. They didn't give orders. They just moved with terrifying precision, taking out Volthar soldiers one by one, their actions swift and silent, like shadows in the night. The Volthar had no idea what was happening. They had no idea that the very warriors they'd been ignoring, the ones they thought were nothing but a myth, were now dismantling their forces from within. The silent warriors were like ghosts, disappearing before the Volthar could even react. As the battle raged outside, Sarah realized that these silent warriors were the key to humanity's survival. They were a force that the Volthar could never fully understand. While the Volthar relied on their overwhelming firepower and strict strategies, the silent warriors fought with something the Volthar had never considered: unpredictability. The tide of the battle began to shift. The Volthar, once confident in their victory, were now scrambling to regroup. But the silent warriors didn't stop. They moved in, striking key targets, cutting off supply lines, and sabotaging Volthar ships, all without leaving a trace. Sarah and her team fought alongside them, amazed by their skill. Every attack seemed planned, yet random. Every move was calculated, yet chaotic. It was as if the silent warriors could read the Volthar's every move before they made it. In the chaos, Sarah caught a glimpse of the masked woman again. She was standing in the distance, watching, waiting. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she disappeared back into the shadows. As the battle drew to a close, the Volthar were forced to retreat. The humans had won against all odds, against the overwhelming might of the Volthar. But they had done it with the help of these silent warriors, these mysterious figures who seemed to live in the shadows. When the dust settled, Sarah looked around at the wreckage. The silent warriors had vanished once again, leaving no trace of their presence. It was as if they had never been there at all. Back at their command base, Sarah tried to make sense of what had just happened. She had seen the Volthar's most powerful weapon disabled, their fleets scattered, and their forces crushed. And all of it had been done without a single word being spoken, without a single battle cry. It was clear now. These silent warriors weren't just soldiers, they were a symbol. A symbol of everything the humans had left. When all hope seemed lost, when the Volthar had already won, the silent warriors showed them the true strength of humanity. They were not loud, they were not brash. They didn't fight with weapons or firepower. They fought with silence, with stealth, with precision. They fought with the one thing the Volthar could never understand: the will to survive, no matter the odds. As Sarah looked up at the stars, she knew one thing for sure: the silent warriors were not a myth. They were humanity's future, and with them, the war was far from over. The war had stretched for years, and humanity was on the verge of defeat. The Volthar, an alien race of unimaginable power, had conquered most of the galaxy. The human resistance was weak, scattered across distant planets, and with each passing day, their hope dwindled further. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and exhausted. In the heart of the human fleet, aboard the starship Endurance, Commander Ethan Cole stood, staring out into the void of space. His ship, like many others, was badly damaged. Their supplies were running low, and the Volthar were closing in on their final stronghold. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Ethan refused to accept the truth that others had already given in to. Defeat was not an option. "Commander, we've lost contact with the other fleets," said Lieutenant Rachel Scott, her voice barely above a whisper as she entered the command room. Ethan didn't turn to face her. His eyes remained fixed on the distant stars, as though they held the answer he was looking for. "What about the Volthar fleets?" he asked quietly. "They're moving toward us, faster than we anticipated. We don't have much time." Ethan felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He knew what was coming. The Volthar's final assault would be swift, and the humans didn't have the firepower to stop it. The resistance had failed. He could see it in the eyes of his crew, the same look of defeat that had spread across the galaxy. But deep down, Something stirred inside him, a feeling that refused to die. "We still have time," Ethan said, his voice steady, despite the storm raging within. He turned to Rachel, his eyes filled with determination. "We're not giving up." Rachel looked at him, her face pale, uncertain. "Commander, how can we fight back? We have nothing left." Ethan looked back at the stars. "We don't need to fight them with more ships or weapons. We fight with what we still have, our will to survive." The room was silent for a moment. The crew had heard those words before. They had all heard the speeches, the promises of victory that never came. But this time, something felt different. There was something in Ethan's voice that made them believe, even if only for a moment, that they could still turn the tide. "We can't let them win," Ethan said, more to himself than anyone else. "We have one final chance, and I'm not going to let it slip by." In the dead of night, deep in the Volter fleet, High Commander Exelrith watched from the control deck as the final push to destroy humanity's remaining forces began. The Volter had crushed every resistance they had encountered. They had beaten entire civilizations into submission, and the humans were no different. They were weak, fragile, and no match for the might of the Volter. Zalrith smiled, watching the humans scramble in their last desperate attempt to hold on. They had been a thorn in the Volter's side for far too long, but soon that would all end. The war would finally be over. But as he looked closer at the human fleet, he noticed something unsettling. Despite the odds, despite the overwhelming power of the Voltar, the humans weren't giving up. They weren't fleeing. They were holding their ground. For the first time, Exarith felt something unfamiliar. Was it fear? He quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something he couldn't quite grasp. But it didn't matter. The Volther were unstoppable. Back on the Endurance, the crew worked tirelessly through the night. They weren't preparing for a battle, they were preparing for something far more important. A plan. Ethan had a plan, one that would either save them all or doom them for good. He called his senior officers into the command room. "We need to hit them where it hurts. The Volther are strong, but they rely too much on their technology. We're going to disable their command systems. If we can break their connection to their fleet, we stand a chance." Rachel was the first to speak up. "But that's suicide. Their fleet is massive, and their defenses are impenetrable. We don't have the strength to fight them head-on." Ethan smiled grimly. "We don't need to fight them head-on. We need to do what we've always done, find a way when there seems to be none." The crew hesitated but saw the fire in Ethan's eyes. It was the same fire that had kept them alive all these years. It was the power of never giving up. For the next several hours, the crew of the Endurance worked tirelessly. They would launch a small strike team to infiltrate the Volther's central command ship and disable their communication systems, effectively breaking their connection to their fleet. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. As the hours ticked away, the human fleet moved into position. The Volther had no idea what was coming. They were confident, too confident. They believed the war was already over. The Endurance was close now, its stealth systems cloaking it from Volther sensors. Ethan stood on the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he was asking of his crew. He knew that many of them would not return. But he also knew that this was their only hope. "Prepare the team," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's now or never." The team boarded their small ships, ready to make the final push. As they moved closer to the Volther flagship, the tension was unbearable. The Volther had no idea they were about to be attacked. They had underestimated the humans once again. Ethan watched as the team slipped through the shadows of space, moving undetected toward their target. The plan was risky, too risky, but it was their only chance. The mission was going as planned until the unexpected happened. A Volther cruiser appeared out of nowhere, intercepting the team just as they reached the flagship. The humans fought back with everything they had, but the Volther were relentless. In the midst of the chaos, Ethan made a choice. He ordered the Endurance to launch a full assault on the Volther fleet, distracting them long enough for the strike team to complete their mission. The odds were against them, but Ethan never lost hope. He couldn't. The power of never giving up was more than just a mantra. It was their strength. The battle raged on. The Volther were surprised by the unexpected resistance, but it was too late. The strike team had succeeded. They had disabled the Volther's command systems. The Volther, cut off from their fleet, were thrown into disarray. The humans seized the opportunity, pushing forward with renewed strength. The Volther had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. As the dust settled, Ethan looked around at the survivors of the battle. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. The Volther had been defeated, but it was more than just a victory. It was proof of the power of never giving up. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the endless defeats, humanity had found a way to survive, to fight, and to win. And as the stars shone brightly overhead, Ethan knew one thing for certain: humanity was not done yet. It all started with a whisper. In the quiet, forgotten corners of the galaxy, a rumor spread humans were rising. It wasn't a large rebellion, nor was it a battle fought with great strength. No, it was much more subtle. It was a spark that began to flicker in the dark, something small that began to grow. The Volther, an empire built on power and fear, thought they had already won. They had crushed the human resistance in every major battle, leaving only scattered pockets of survivors. And yet, in those pockets, something changed. Something they hadn't expected. On the outskirts of the galaxy, Commander Lena Hayes watched as the last of the human ships limped into a hidden space station. Their faces were grim and their bodies were battered. Every ship had taken damage, every soldier had scars, both visible and hidden. The Volther had pushed humanity to the brink of extinction, but the humans weren't done yet. "We have no place left to run," Lena said, looking out the window of the station, her voice cold but steady. "The Volther are relentless. They'll destroy everything we've built here." "I know, Commander," Lieutenant Michael Ward replied, his voice filled with concern. "But I've been hearing something. Rumors from the other stations. A new force is gathering. Something big. We might not be alone." Lena shook her head. "It's just more hope. False hope." Michael took a deep breath. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the tipping point we've been waiting for." Back on Volther command ship Obsidian, High Commander Exalrith paced the deck, his every step calculated and cold. He had long believed that humanity's resistance would falter eventually. They had no true military power left, and their leadership was broken. Yet, the whispers of a new human threat had reached him, and it made him uneasy. This rebellion. They should have been wiped out by now. Zareth barked, his eyes burning with anger. "Why haven't they just surrendered?" "High Commander, the situation is becoming more complicated," his lieutenant responded, unease creeping into his voice. "The humans are using new tactics. We've lost several ships. They've begun launching surprise strikes, and they seem to be uniting. A few successful skirmishes don't mean they are a threat. We will crush them like we've crushed every other rebellion." But something in his mind lingered. That whisper of a force rising. The tipping point that could turn everything in their favor. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had underestimated the humans. And that fear, even for a moment, unsettled him. In the hidden station, Lena and her team had begun to make plans. They had no grand strategy, no overwhelming fleet. They had something else: hope. The Volther had grown arrogant, expecting the human resistance to collapse entirely. But the humans had found something unexpected. Each defeat only pushed them further. They had learned to survive, to adapt. Lena stood before a group of engineers and strategists. "We're going to strike at the heart of the Volther Empire. Not with brute force, but with precision. We will hit them where they least expect it." Michael stepped forward, his eyes full of determination. "We've gathered all the intelligence we can. The Volther command ship Obsidian is the key. If we can destroy their central control, their entire fleet will fall apart." Lena nodded. "This mission isn't just about victory. It's about sending a message. A message that we aren't broken. We haven't lost. And if we stand together, we will win." The team rallied around her. There was a fire in their eyes. It was the same fire that had burned in humans for centuries: the will to survive. It wasn't the biggest fleets or the strongest weapons that would win this war. It was something much stronger, the human spirit. The Volther were not prepared. Saurath had grown overconfident. He believed the humans had nothing left, that they were on the brink of destruction. But Lena and her team had planned in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. They didn't need a massive force. They only needed the element of surprise. As the small human fleet approached the Obsidian, Lena's heart raced. The plan was risky. The Volther were powerful, and their ship was heavily defended. If they failed, they would all die. But if they succeeded, it would send shockwaves through the Volther Empire. "We're in position," Michael said, his voice tight with focus. "Ready to strike." Lena took one final breath. "Make it count." The small fleet moved in, slipping through the Volther's defenses like shadows. They were using their stealth technology to stay hidden, moving closer and closer to the Obsidian. As they neared the flagship, the tension was unbearable. Then, without warning, the silence of space was shattered by the roar of explosions. The first wave of human fighters broke through the defenses, launching a surprise attack on the Volther ships. The Volther didn't know what hit them. Inside the Obsidian, Exareth's face turned pale. "What is happening? How are they doing this?" "It's the humans," the lieutenant said, his voice tinged with fear. "They found a way to bypass our defenses." The chaos unfolded quickly. Human ships darted in and out of the Volther fleet, striking key targets with surgical precision. Their mission was clear: disable the Volther command ship's control systems, and the fleet would be thrown into disarray. Lena's team infiltrated the Obsidian, sneaking through the ship's dark corridors, planting explosives and disabling critical systems. Every move they made was calculated. Every step was taken with the knowledge that failure meant death. They were a small group, but they moved with the power of a force much larger. Back on the Volther command ship, Exareth's anger reached a boiling point. His fleet was falling apart, and he couldn't understand why. The humans, those weak creatures, had done something he thought impossible. They had found their tipping point, the breaking point that allowed them to rise again. The explosion that rocked the Obsidian sent a shockwave through the Volther command. It was over. The humans had done it. Their surprise attack had crippled the Volther fleet. For the first time in years, the Volther were on the defensive. Lena watched from the station's command center as the Volther fleet scattered, their once unified strength collapsing. The tipping point had come. They had succeeded. The Volther were no longer unstoppable. The tide of the war had turned. "We did it," Michael whispered, disbelief in his voice. Lena smiled, but it wasn't a smile of celebration. It was a smile of realization. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The tipping point was just the beginning. Now, humanity would rise. Now, they would fight to finish what they had started. The Volther had thought they could crush the human spirit. But they had underestimated one thing: humanity never gave up. And now, the galaxy would never be the same. The sky above was dark, bruised with the shadow of 1,000 Volther ships. They hovered over the last human stronghold, the city of Altheon, a fortress built into the very heart of a planet that had once been home to millions. Now, only a few thousand humans remained, their bodies battered and their spirits worn thin. Commander Alyssa Reed stood on the edge of the observation deck, staring out at the incoming storm. The Volther had torn through their defenses, wiped out entire fleets, and wiped out every major human colony. Altheon was the last hope. If the Volther destroyed it, humanity would be finished. And yet, even now, Alyssa could hear the whispers of doubt. How long could they last against an enemy so powerful? "Commander, we're ready," said Lieutenant Jordan Wells, his voice calm but edged with concern. He stood beside Alyssa, eyes locked on the darkening sky. "We've fortified the city's last defenses, but it's a matter of time. The Volther are relentless." Alyssa took a deep breath, her eyes still fixed on the looming threat. "We've come this far. We've survived against impossible odds. We're not giving up now." In the command center, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. The team gathered around a holographic display of the city, watching the Volther fleet descend like vultures circling their prey. On the surface, the city looked calm, but beneath it, the hum of energy shields and the sound of weapons charging could be felt in every corner. Every person in the room knew that this would be their final stand. "Prepare the defense lines," Alyssa ordered, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "We'll hold them off as long as we can. We can't let them take Altheon." The officers nodded, immediately getting to work. There was no turning back now. The humans had no more reserves, no more ships, and no more reinforcements. It was them against an entire Volther fleet. And yet, there was something in the air, a quiet determination that refused to die. On the Volther flagship Imperium, High Commander Exalrith surveyed the humans below. His heart was filled with impatience. They had fought and died for too long, and now the end was near. The final blow would be struck today. "Commander, the human resistance is making their last stand," his lieutenant reported. "They're fortifying their defenses. It will be a bloody fight." Zareth smiled darkly. "Let them put up their resistance. It will be their last mistake." He had underestimated the humans before, but now he was sure they had nothing left to fight with. It would be a quick victory. He had seen this before. The Volther had wiped out entire civilizations without breaking a sweat. The humans were no different. They had fought hard, but now their time had come. Alyssa stood in front of her team in the last war room. The walls were shaking with the tremors of incoming Volther blasts. The shields above the city flickered under the pressure. They were already losing ground. "Commander," Jordan said, his voice tight, "we can't hold them off for much longer. The Volther are too strong." Alyssa looked around at the faces of the men and women who had fought beside her for years. They were tired, some on the brink of collapse, but there was something unyielding in their eyes. She had been with them through every battle, every hardship. She knew they were all terrified of what was coming, but they were still here. They hadn't run. They hadn't given up. "We don't need to hold them off forever," Alyssa said, her voice low but firm. "We only need to hold them off long enough. Just long enough for the others to evacuate. We fight until the very end." It was the only plan they had left. The city had been prepared for a full-scale assault, but no one had expected the Volther to bring everything they had. The humans had no chance of winning. But that wasn't the point anymore. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting so that humanity could survive, so that the legacy of their race wouldn't fade away into nothing. As the battle raged outside, the humans did everything they could to slow the Volther down. They fired weapons, launched fighters, and activated every defense system they had left. Each explosion that rocked the city was a painful reminder that time was running out. Inside the command center, Alyssa watched as the hologram of the Volther fleet grew larger. They were closing in. The Volther would land soon, and when they did, the final fight would begin. "We're running out of time," Jordan said, his voice strained. "The shields can't hold much longer. We need to decide our next move." Alyssa's mind raced. There was no real choice. The human forces were too small. The Volther were too strong. But Alyssa refused to show fear. She had to be strong for her people, for her soldiers, for the future of humanity. "We won't retreat." "Not today," Alyssa said, her words firm. "We will stand our ground. The rest of humanity needs this time. Every second we buy them could mean a chance for survival." There was no time to waste. She knew they would not win this fight, but they would make the Volther pay for every inch they took. They would make them feel the power of human resistance, even if it cost them everything. The first Volther forces landed on the city's surface, sending shockwaves through the ground. The human forces were waiting for them. The streets of Altheon became a battleground, with gunfire ringing out, shouts filling the air, and explosions lighting up the night sky. Every human soldier fought with everything they had, knowing this would be their last stand. Alyssa moved through the streets with her team, rallying the remaining forces. "Fight for your families," she shouted, her voice carrying over the noise of battle. "Fight for everything we've lost." She watched as the resistance held strong, even as the Volther closed in on them. For a brief moment, the Volther, so sure of their victory, were beginning to lose their confidence. But it wasn't enough. As the Volther pressed forward, the last of the human defenses began to crumble. Alyssa knew the end was near, but she wasn't afraid. When the Volther finally broke through the last defenses, Alyssa stood tall in the midst of the chaos. She looked out over the battlefield and saw the humans fighting with everything they had. They fought to the last, not because they thought they could win, but because they knew their stand meant something. As the Volther stormed the city, Alyssa gave one final order. Tell the rest of humanity we fought until the end. With that, she took her position, ready to face the enemy head-on. The humans had lost their city, but they had won something far more valuable, a legacy that would never be forgotten.